The rain came down in sheets. Kendrick Vaughn pulled his truck to the shoulder and killed the engine. 40 yards ahead, an elderly woman stood alone beside a stalled sedan, her white hair plastered flat against her forehead. Dozens of cars blew past without slowing. He grabbed his toolbox and walked through the rain. Her name was Maribel. Her phone was dead. She apologized twice for the inconvenience, as though it were somehow her fault that no one else had stopped. Kendrick didn't respond. He was already under the hood. What he found there had nothing to do with age or wear. A sensor wire, cut clean with a precision blade. A fuse swapped for the wrong rating. A connector pulled loose and reset just enough to hold, long enough to get her away from traffic before everything failed. Someone had planned this. He fixed it anyway, said nothing that would frighten her, and refused the cash she tried to press into his hand. That was when the black SUV pulled up behind them. The woman who stepped out looked at Kendrick, his worn jacket, his scarred toolbox, the wire still in his hand, and asked, very quietly, what he had done to her mother's car. Kendrick held out the cut wire and the wrong fuse. "I fixed it," he said. "You should be asking who tried to kill her. If stories like this stay with you, stories about people who do the right thing when no one is watching, hit subscribe. There's a new one every week, and this one is just getting started." Kendrick Vaughn had been running Vaughn Motor Works for 6 years, and in that time he had learned to ignore a lot of things. The water stain spreading across the ceiling tile above his desk. The way the hydraulic lift groaned when it hit 40 degrees outside. The stack of overdue rent notices he kept face down beneath the register. The shop sat in a strip of commercial buildings on the west side of Detroit that nobody had bothered to renovate since the 90s. One bay, one lift, a diagnostic machine that still ran software from 2014. The tools on his pegboard were organized with the kind of care that comes from not being able to afford replacements. His landlord, a property manager named Greer, had called twice that week. The building had attracted interest from a development group. If Kendrick couldn't cover 4 months of back rent within 14 days, the lease was done. Kendrick had listened, said he understood, and gone back to work. His daughter Ayla was 8 years old and currently staying with his sister 2 miles away. She had her own room there, a routine, a school bus that came at 7:15. Kendrick told himself it was a practical arrangement. On the nights he drove home alone past midnight, he didn't examine it too closely. What most people in the neighborhood didn't know, and what Kendrick never volunteered, was that he had spent 7 years as a senior diagnostics engineer at Orion Dynamics, a mid-size firm that developed embedded safety software for major automotive manufacturers. He had been good at the work, better than good. Then, 5 years ago, he had found something he wasn't supposed to find, a hidden access port buried inside Orion's core codebase. Not a bug, not a legacy artifact, a deliberate structure, a backdoor that allowed internal users to modify vehicle fault reports remotely, after the fact, without triggering an audit flag. He had documented it carefully, time-stamped, cross-referenced, prepared to escalate. By the time he reached his supervisor's office, the data was gone. Every file he had flagged, every log he had saved, wiped. And in its place, a trail of access records bearing his own digital signature, dated 3 days earlier, suggesting he had been the one to breach the system. The only person who had spoken up for him was Desmond Avery, an independent safety inspector who had consulted for Orion on a short-term contract. Desmond had told the review board that the timeline didn't hold, that Kendrick's pattern of work made the accusations implausible. The board had thanked him for his input and proceeded with the termination. Kendrick was dismissed for data theft and breach of proprietary systems. No company in the industry would touch him after that. He took what remained in his savings account, signed a lease on the bay, and became a mechanic. He and Desmond still talked, not often, but steadily, a call every few months. Desmond had never stopped believing the evidence had been manufactured. Kendrick had stopped saying it out loud, but he hadn't stopped knowing it. The woman beside the stalled sedan had given her name as Maribel. She was in her early 70s, composed even in the rain, and she held her dead phone in both hands as though she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. She thanked Kendrick twice before he had even opened the hood, and once more when he asked her to step back from the wheel well. He worked quickly and said little. The damage was specific in a way that looked, at first pass, like accumulated wear. That was the point. The cut on the sensor wire was almost too clean. Anyone unfamiliar with the system would have called it fraying. The fuse swap was the same. Wrong amperage rating, common enough to pass a visual inspection, catastrophic over time under load. But it was the connector that told him the most. It had been fully removed and reseated. The hands that had done it knew exactly where to reach. And the net effect of all three interventions, taken together, was a vehicle that would run normally for 8 to 12 miles before failing. Enough distance to carry the driver from a populated area to somewhere quiet. Kendrick sourced what he needed from his own truck's emergency kit and the parts box he kept behind the seat. It took him 22 minutes. When he was done, the sedan would hold long enough to get Maribel home. She tried to pay him. He shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "Getting home safe is what matters tonight." She looked at him for a moment in a way that was different from gratitude, more like recognition. She picked up his business card from the dash of her car, where he had set it without thinking, and put it in her coat pocket. The SUV arrived before she could pull out. It was a late-model black Escalade, and it stopped 10 feet behind the sedan with its hazards blinking. Two men in dark coats got out first, then the woman. She was in her early 40s, tailored jacket over a silk blouse, heels she somehow navigated on the wet gravel. She moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent years never wasting a step. Her eyes went to Kendrick first, to the wire in his hand, the toolbox at his feet, the smear of grease across the back of his knuckles, and her expression closed. Kendrick would learn later how she had known to come. The sedan carried a passive location monitor linked to the Langston Estate's security system, installed years ago at her insistence, after her mother had twice driven alone at night without telling anyone. When the vehicle stopped moving on an unfamiliar road and the ignition signal went dark, the system had flagged it automatically and sent an alert to her phone. She had been 20 minutes away. She asked him, carefully and without warmth, what he had done to her mother's car. Kendrick held out the cut wire and the mismatched fuse. He set them in her palm so she could feel them. "I fixed it," he said. "You should be asking who tried to kill her." The head of Tessa Langston's security detail was a compact, gray-haired man named Briggs who had been doing this work for 15 years. He examined the sedan on the shoulder while Tessa spoke to her mother in the back seat of the Escalade. When he came back, he reported that the car had been inspected that morning and cleared. His tone implied that whatever Kendrick was suggesting was either a misunderstanding or an exaggeration. Kendrick pointed to three things: the edge profile of the cut, tool marks, not stress fractures; the grease print on the connector housing, not road grime, gear lubricant, the kind used in professional shop settings; and the fuse, which wasn't a worn original, but a deliberate substitution from a different manufacturer's line. He added the detail that mattered most. The failure wasn't designed to happen immediately. The vehicle was set up to run, to carry its driver away from traffic and witnesses, and then to die. Briggs looked at the evidence and said nothing further. Tessa transferred her mother to the Escalade and arranged for the sedan to be towed to Langston Automotive's technical center. Before she left, Maribel caught Kendrick's eye through the window and gave a small, deliberate nod, the kind that meant she had already decided something. The call came at 9:40 that evening. Kendrick was alone in the shop, running invoices he already knew wouldn't balance, when his cell buzzed on the workbench. The number was from a downtown exchange he didn't recognize. Tessa's voice was different on the phone than it had been on the road. Still controlled, but with something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Her internal team had confirmed everything he had described: the wire, the fuse, the connector. The telemetry data from the sedan's onboard system, however, had been wiped, which meant whoever had done this had also had access to the vehicle's software backend. Then she made him an offer: $20,000. A non-disclosure agreement. His silence on all aspects of the incident. The figure, she noted, was fair. It was more than fair. It was exactly the amount he needed to clear 4 months of back rent with enough left to restock the parts inventory. He could hear her waiting. "If you pay me to stay quiet," he said, "whoever did this will know the test worked. They'll know they can try again." A pause. Then Tessa told him something she hadn't planned to. The Vertex X prototypes, Langston Automotive's flagship autonomous vehicle line, set for public launch in 6 weeks, had been logging unexplained sensor errors for the past month. Her engineering team had attributed them to software calibration issues. After tonight, she was no longer sure that explanation was honest. She wanted him to come to the technical center and look at the data. Kendrick sat with that for a long moment. He looked around the shop, the lift, the stain on the ceiling, the face-down rent notices. He had left that world because it had taken everything from him. His career, his reputation, 6 years of his life. He had rebuilt something small and quiet and his own. And staying inside it was the only version of safety he had managed to construct. But he had also seen what was cut into that sensor wire. And he understood what it meant if the same hands had been inside the Vertex X system. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. 8 o'clock. He set the phone down and didn't move for a while. Then he picked it up again and called Desmond. Langston Automotive's technical center occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building in Midtown that had been renovated twice in the last decade. The lobby had a marble reception desk, a security checkpoint with badge scanners, and a wall-mounted display cycling through renderings of the Vertex X, a low, clean vehicle that looked less like a car than a statement. Kendrick arrived at 8 in worn canvas work pants and a navy jacket with a grease mark on the left cuff he had missed that morning. He carried his laptop bag and his personal diagnostic drive. The receptionist looked at him, then at her screen, then at him again, before confirming his name was on the list. Tessa met him at the elevator. She introduced him to the assembled engineering team as the man who had repaired her mother's vehicle. Nothing more. The room's response was immediate and unspoken. A collective recalibration downward. One of the senior engineers, a man named Price, asked if Kendrick needed someone to walk him through the system architecture. Kendrick said that wouldn't be necessary. The person who made his position clearest was Conrad Duval, who arrived 20 minutes into the session uninvited and installed himself at the head of the conference table as though he had organized the meeting himself. Conrad was in his late 60s, silver-haired and deliberate, with the particular ease of a man who had never been asked to justify his presence anywhere. He had known Tessa's father. He controlled enough board votes to make that history feel like leverage. He looked at Kendrick's bag, at the folding chair someone had added at the side of the table, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The legal obstruction came from Gordon Bellamy, the company's general counsel, a thin man with rimless glasses who communicated almost entirely through procedural language. When Kendrick requested access to the Vertex X raw fault logs, Gordon explained that proprietary system data could not be shared with unvetted external parties under the terms of Langston Automotive's IP protection framework. "You fix cars on the side of the road," Gordon said, capping his pen. "This isn't the place for a mechanic's intuition." Kendrick didn't look up from the summary reports Tessa had been permitted to give him. "Then I'll work with what I have," he said. What he had was enough. The summary logs showed sensor error patterns across 3 Vertex X prototypes. The engineering team's read was intermittent calibration drift, the kind of ghost data that shows up when software talks to hardware across variable temperature ranges. Plausible. Common, even, in early-stage autonomous systems. But the drift wasn't random. Kendrick mapped it against the timestamps and found a structure underneath. The errors occurred at preset intervals. Each instance was followed, within 6 minutes, by a log deletion event attributed to routine system maintenance. And in each case, the error pattern resolved cleanly, too cleanly, which in a genuine calibration issue was almost impossible. Genuine sensor drift is messy. It leaves residue. This left nothing. He had seen this architecture before. Not similar, identical. The same stepwise data displacement, the same self-referential fault attribution, the same deletion cadence. He had documented it 5 years ago at Orion Dynamics and spent 4 months trying to prove it existed before his own signature was used to bury him. He didn't say this yet. He noted it, set it aside, and kept reading. Tessa had spent the previous evening with Kendrick's employment history pulled up on her laptop. She had expected to find what Conrad had described, a disgruntled engineer with a grievance and a failed business. What she found instead was a record full of gaps where there should have been explanations. No evidence of financial motive for the alleged data breach. No receiving party identified for the leaked material. A digital signature added to an access log at a timestamp that post-dated the log entry itself. A technical impossibility if the access had been genuine. And the name of the attorney who had overseen the termination proceedings, Gordon Bellamy, then working as outside counsel for Orion Dynamics. She sat with that for a long time. The next morning, before the engineering session ended, she found a moment alone with Kendrick in the corridor outside the server room. She told him what she had found. She didn't frame it as an apology. She wasn't sure she had done anything wrong yet, but she said it directly, which was the only way she knew how to say anything. Kendrick listened. Then he said, "Gordon was at Orion? Outside counsel. He managed the legal review of your case." A silence. Not surprise. Exactly. More like the sound of something fitting into place after years of sitting wrong. "That's why the code looks the same," he said. "It's not similar. It's the same system. Someone carried it from Orion into Langston." Tessa said, "I want you to present this to the board." They won't listen. Maybe not. But it goes on record. The closed board session was held 3 days later in the executive conference room on the 31st floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A long oval table with 12 chairs. Kendrick's folding chair had been replaced by a proper one, but it was still positioned slightly to the side, as though someone had added it after the room was set. Conrad opened by acknowledging that the meeting had been called at the CEO's request to review a security concern and that the board was prepared to hear a presentation from an external party. His tone was the verbal equivalent of a hand-held palm out, contained, faintly amused. He looked at Kendrick's toolbox, which Kendrick had set beside his chair because it held his cables and adapters, and said, "I suppose we should be grateful he didn't bring the whole lift." 2 board members smiled. One of them quickly didn't. Kendrick asked for the wall display and pulled up 3 data sets in parallel: the fault records from Maribel's sedan, the Vertex X prototype logs, and the system access history Tessa had secured from the server backup. He walked through it without editorial. Timestamps, error intervals, deletion patterns, the structural overlap between the 2 systems, a sedan built 12 years ago and a prototype not yet released to the public, that had no innocent explanation. "A sensor wire cut on a private vehicle," he said, "carries the same software signature as a fault pattern embedded in a development system that didn't exist when that car rolled off the line. That signature had to be placed in both locations by someone with access to both." Gordon moved to interrupt. Kendrick spoke over him, not loudly, just without stopping. The Vertex X system was never public. The sedan wasn't connected to any Langston network. The only way these share a code base is if someone brought the code in from outside and installed it deliberately in both places. The room went quiet. Tessa ordered the test server access locked before anyone else spoke. She had anticipated this moment. Before the session began, she had instructed her IT director to prepare a full offline data copy and hand it directly to Kendrick. The copy was already in his bag. Whatever happened to the live server, the evidence was no longer only in one place. In the silence that followed, Kendrick watched Conrad turn his head toward Gordon. It lasted less than 2 seconds. The kind of glance that isn't a communication, it's a reflex. The look of 2 people who share a secret so long it has become structural. Tessa saw it too. She said nothing. But Kendrick noticed her hands, which had been flat on the table, close slowly into stillness. The next 72 hours moved in 2 directions at once. Maribel, reviewing the events of that evening more carefully at her daughter's request, remembered a detail she hadn't thought to mention. Before she had taken the route where the car failed, one of Conrad's security staff, a man she recognized from board events, had flagged her down and suggested she avoid her usual road. Traffic, he had said. She had taken his word for it. The dashcam footage from the sedan confirmed what happened next. In the private parking structure at the Langston estate, 2 hours before Maribel's drive, a technician in contractor coveralls had opened the hood and worked for 4 minutes before walking away. The logo on his jacket belonged to a firm called Drayton Systems. Kendrick recognized the name. Drayton had held a support contract with Orion Dynamics during the years he worked there. Tessa pulled Langston Automotive's vendor records. Drayton Systems appeared once, in a contract approved 8 months earlier by Gordon Bellamy, bypassing the standard safety vetting process entirely. Maribel then told them something else. Her late husband, in the years before he died, had grown suspicious of Conrad's ambitions. He had responded the way careful men respond to uncertain futures, quietly, legally, and in writing. So, buried in Langston Automotive's founding charter was a clause that granted the sitting CEO the right to call an emergency audit and suspend the board chair's voting rights if that chair could be shown to have deliberately endangered the founding family or compromised product safety. Triggering it required direct documented evidence linking Conrad to the conduct in question. They didn't have that yet, but they were close enough that Conrad could see it coming. He moved first. Kendrick's termination records from Orion Dynamics appeared on 3 automotive news sites within the same hour, leaked simultaneously, framed consistently. The coverage described him as a disgraced engineer exploiting a grieving CEO to settle a personal vendetta against an industry that had rightfully expelled him. One headline used the phrase, "engineering fraud." By the following morning, Kendrick's remaining customers had called to cancel appointments. His landlord, Greer, left a voicemail saying the development group had accelerated its offer and he needed the space by the end of the week. Kendrick's business accounts held enough to cover about 9 days of operating costs. Tessa called and offered her legal team. Kendrick told her no. He asked for 3 things instead: the offline data copy she had already prepared, access to a system terminal he could work on outside the building, and 1 day. Then he called Desmond. Desmond Avery arrived at the shop at 11 that night with a hard case of equipment and no questions. Or rather, all his questions had been answered the moment Kendrick told him the code structure matched what they had both seen at Orion. Desmond had spent 5 years working independent vehicle safety cases and carrying the quiet knowledge that what happened to Kendrick hadn't been an accident. He set up his equipment on the workbench without ceremony and got to work. By 2 in the morning, they had mapped the full architecture of the embedded malware. It was not subtle, once you knew where to look. A trigger sequence, dormant in the Vertex X system, set to activate on a specific calendar date, the day of the vehicle's public launch. When it fired, it would push simultaneous sensor errors across every connected prototype on the demonstration floor. The vehicles would lose navigational coherence in front of a live press event. The market response to that kind of failure in a public autonomous vehicle launch would be immediate and catastrophic. The financial trail Desmond reconstructed from the server fragments told the rest of the story. A private investment group, registered offshore, had been accumulating a short position against Langston Automotive stock for the past 4 months. The position would pay out at maximum value if the company's share price collapsed before the end of the quarter. One of the group's nominee directors shared a registered address with a shell company that had made payments to Drayton Systems. The shell company's authorizing signatures belonged to Conrad Duval. Maribel's car had been a field test, a proof of concept, a confirmation that the code could present as organic failure and that no one would look twice at an old woman broken down in the rain. Desmond looked up from his screen and said, "We have it." Kendrick looked at the clock. It was 4:17. The emergency board session Conrad had called, framed as a vote to remove Tessa for mishandling proprietary data, was scheduled to begin at 9. The recovery program ran its final sequence and crashed. The last partition of deleted log data remained locked. Kendrick restarted it manually and sat in the chair with his eyes closed. At 5:40, the partition opened. The access log inside traced every unauthorized modification in the Vertex X system. Each entry carried 2 signatures, Gordon Bellamy's credentials as executing party, and Conrad Duval's executive override code as approving authority. Conrad had signed off on all of it. Every deletion, every planted error, every cover. Desmond immediately began drafting his independent certification, a formal document he had prepared the framework for 2 hours earlier, anticipating this outcome. As a licensed vehicle safety auditor with standing before federal regulators, his written attestation carried legal weight the moment it bore his signature and timestamp. By 7:30, it was complete, printed, and signed. Kendrick stared at the screen for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Maribel. He didn't ask her to come to the meeting. He told her what had been done to her car, who had ordered it, and why. He told her what would happen at 9 o'clock if no one withstanding challenged it. Then he said, "You deserve to know the truth. Whatever you do with it is your decision." He set the phone down and started printing. The 31st floor conference room looked the same as it had 3 days earlier. Same oval table, same 12 chairs, same windows framing the city in flat morning gray. The only difference was the atmosphere, which had the compressed, airless quality of a room where a decision had already been made, and the proceedings were a formality. Conrad had arranged it well. 7 of the 11 voting board members were present and accounted for. The agenda circulated the previous evening listed a single item: a vote of no confidence in the current chief executive, citing unauthorized disclosure of proprietary development data to an external party with a documented history of corporate espionage. Tessa sat at her end of the table. She had not slept. Kendrick was brought in as a witness, Conrad's framing, his request, his idea of a finishing move. He sat in the side chair, his printed documents face down on the table in front of him, and waited. Conrad opened without preamble. He told the board that Tessa Langston, in a moment of emotional vulnerability following a minor incident involving her mother, had invited a discredited former engineer onto company premises and granted him access to sensitive development infrastructure. He noted that this individual had been terminated from his previous employer for data theft, that the termination had been upheld through legal review, and that no credible evidence of wrongdoing on the company's part had been produced in the days since. He said, "What has been produced is noise. A grievance dressed up as a conspiracy." He let that settle. Then he looked at Kendrick directly for the first time. "You want this board to believe that a mechanic running a failing shop on the west side found something that hundreds of our engineers missed. Is that the claim?" Kendrick met his eyes. "No," he said. "I want this board to look at the data your people tried to delete." Gordon began to object. Procedural grounds, authentication of materials, chain of custody. He was still speaking when the conference room door opened. Maribel Langston walked in. She had driven herself. She was wearing the same coat she'd had on the night her car failed, and she carried a manila envelope and a slim leather folder that Kendrick recognized from the photograph Tessa had shown him, her husband's copy of the founding charter, kept in the estate's study for 30 years. She did not apologize for the interruption. She set the leather folder on the table, opened it to a marked page, and placed her hand flat on the document. "I am the largest individual shareholder of this company," she said. "My husband put that clause in the charter because he knew Conrad. He knew exactly what kind of man he was dealing with, and he planned accordingly." She looked at Gordon. "The clause doesn't require board approval to invoke. It requires the signature of a founding shareholder. I'm the only one left." She signed the authentication form. Tessa slid across the table. The emergency audit provision was now active. Conrad's voting rights were suspended pending the outcome. Conrad's expression didn't break, but something behind it went very still. Kendrick connected his drive to the room's display system and pulled up the first screen. He rebuilt the incident with Maribel's car from the ground up, not as a story, but as a data sequence. The fault conditions, the timing architecture, the specific technical choices that made the failure look like where. He showed the board what each intervention actually required in terms of system knowledge, and what that implied about the person who had designed it. Then he pulled up the Vertex X logs beside it and ran the simulation live. He replicated the exact environmental conditions logged on the night of Maribel's breakdown and fed the same command sequence into the Vertex X test environment. The board watched the prototype system respond in real time, sensor values beginning to drift in the same stepped pattern, fault attribution redirecting toward hardware wear, log deletion initiating automatically 6 minutes later. And then, because Kendrick's recovery tool was running in parallel, every layer of that process exposing itself before it could close. The command chain appeared on the left half of the screen. The deletion attempt played out and failed on the right. The structural identity between the two systems was visible to anyone in the room with functional eyes. Desmond Avery's written certification appeared next, time-stamped, signed, bearing his federal auditor credentials. It confirmed that the malicious code had been present in the Vertex X architecture prior to Kendrick's access to the system. He could not have planted it. Chronologically, it was impossible. Tessa took over. She walked the board through the contractor footage from the estate parking structure. She presented the Drayton Systems contract, Gordon's signature, no safety review, no secondary approval. She showed the vendor payment records, the offshore investment group, the short position against Langston stock, and the registered address that connected the nominee director to Conrad's shell company. She showed them the recovered access log, Gordon's credentials on every execution, Conrad's override code on every approval. One of the board members leaned forward and asked Gordon directly, "Is that your authorization signature on every one of those entries?" Gordon looked at the screen. He looked at Conrad. Conrad's face had settled into the particular blankness of a man calculating whether any exit still exists. Gordon said nothing. The board member said, "I'll take that as a confirmation." The vote to invoke the emergency audit passed 8-1, with 2 abstentions. Conrad sat through it without speaking. He had arrived that morning certain of the outcome, and was now learning, at 67 years old, what it felt like to have a room turn. Gordon's system credentials were revoked before he reached the elevator. Building security escorted him to the lobby and retrieved his access badge. Conrad was informed that his voting rights would remain suspended pending a formal investigation, and that he was expected to cooperate fully with both the company's internal audit team and any external authorities the board chose to involve. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and left, without acknowledging anyone in the room. Not Tessa, not Kendrick, not Maribel, who watched him go with an expression that wasn't satisfaction, just the quiet finality of something long expected, now arrived. The formal investigation took 11 weeks. The Drayton Systems technicians who had worked on Maribel's vehicle cooperated once it became clear that their exposure was significantly reduced by doing so. They confirmed they had received their instructions through Gordon and that their payments had been routed through a project account that traced back, through 2 intermediary entities, to Conrad's offshore holding structure. Conrad's attorney issued statements. None of them held. The charges filed against him included criminal conspiracy, securities fraud, deliberate endangerment, and tampering with vehicle safety systems. Gordon faced separate charges relating to obstruction, filing false records, and his role in the original Orion Dynamics case, which the state attorney's office reopened on the basis of the recovered log data and Desmond's independent certification. The Orion case took longer to untangle, but the conclusion was not complicated. Kendrick had found a genuine backdoor. Gordon, then working as outside counsel, had arranged for the evidence to be destroyed and the access logs to be altered. Kendrick's digital signature had been used without his knowledge. The company had been aware and had chosen burial over disclosure. A formal letter arrived at Vaughn Motor Works on a Tuesday morning. It came from Langston Automotive's board on behalf of themselves and the relevant parties at Orion. It acknowledged, without legal hedging or euphemism, that Kendrick Vaughn had been wrongfully accused, wrongfully terminated, and wrongfully excluded from his profession. It restored his engineering credentials and invited him to submit any record correction requests he wished to pursue. He read it once, folded it, and put it on the shelf behind the register. Tessa's offer came a week later. Director of Diagnostic Safety. An office on the 28th floor. Oversight authority across all Langston Automotive product lines. With the power to halt any vehicle release he determined to be unsafe. Kendrick considered it for 2 days. Then he told her no. She wasn't surprised. She had prepared for it. Langston Automotive would cover the back rent on Vaughn Motor Works. All of it, in full. The shop would be formally contracted as an independent safety verification partner for the company's vehicle line, with a mandate to review and certify any system flagged for concern. Kendrick would answer to no one inside the building. His findings would be documented as external certifications, which meant they carried the weight of third-party audit rather than internal review. He could not be overruled by a board vote. He could not be quietly reassigned. If he found something wrong, it would be on record as found. He could keep the shop, keep the lift, the pegboard, the stained ceiling tile, keep the work he had built from the last of what he had. He signed the contract on a Wednesday afternoon, at the counter where he wrote up oil change invoices, with a pen from the cup by the register. The Vertex X launched publicly 4 months later, after a full system audit and independent safety certification that took longer than the marketing team wanted and exactly as long as it needed to take. At the press event, Tessa spoke about the delay without apology. She said the company had discovered a deliberate effort to compromise its safety architecture and had chosen to address that completely rather than quickly. She said the person whose work had made that possible ran a repair shop on the west side of Detroit and had charged her nothing for the most important diagnostic work the company had ever received. She did not describe him as a hero. She described him as someone who looked at a car and told the truth about what he saw. The sign above the bay door was new. white lettering on a dark background, clean and legible from the street. Vaughn Motor Works, Independent Safety Partner, Langston Automotive. Two things hung on the wall behind the service counter. The letter from the board, framed simply, and a laminated certification bearing the seal of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, confirming Vaughn Motor Works as an authorized independent vehicle safety auditor. Maribel came by on Thursdays, usually around 10. She brought coffee in a thermos and asked about Ayla, who had moved back in with Kendrick after the shop's finances stabilized. She never called ahead. The sedan was running well. Tessa came less regularly, but more unexpectedly. She stopped calling it a check-in after the third visit. Kendrick stopped pretending he hadn't noticed the pattern. There was no single conversation that changed anything between them, just a series of moments in which the suspicion and the distance they had each carried into that first meeting on the road became something else, something neither of them had a name for yet, and neither felt the need to name. He still fixed cars for people who couldn't pay. A single mother whose alternator had given out. A teenager with a cracked radiator and $40 in his wallet. An elderly man whose sedan threw a code that turned out to be a loose connector, corrected in 4 minutes and charged at 0. He did it the same way he had always done it, quietly, before anyone could tell him it wasn't worth his time. One evening, Ayla sat on the stool by the lift and asked him why he had helped the old woman in the rain. They'd had almost nothing left, she said. She had heard enough by then to understand how close it had been. Kendrick wiped his hands on a shop rag and thought about it. Because kindness only means something, he said, if you do it before you know what you're going to get back. Ayla considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old who was not entirely satisfied by the answer, but recognized it was the real one. A week later, a woman guided a rusted hatchback into the bay and turned off an engine that sounded like it was running on apology. She got out and said she had about $60 and didn't know if that was enough. Kendrick looked at the car, looked at her. "Let's get you home safe first," he said. "We'll figure out the rest after." He reached for his toolbox. Same one. Latches worn smooth from 10,000 openings. He lifted the hood and he went to work. Kendrick never set out to bring down a billion-dollar conspiracy. He stopped because an old woman was standing alone in the rain and nobody else did. That's it. That's the whole reason. There's something worth sitting with in that. The people who end up changing things rarely start out trying to. They just refuse to drive past. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and stick around. Every week there's another one about ordinary people who did the extraordinary thing of simply choosing not to look away. You won't want to miss what's coming next.